The Polestar 3 has a pretty tough task ahead of it. As a large electric SUV, the other options at this price point are pretty premium. The large BMW iX or the petrol-powered Porsche Cayenne, for now. So the Polestar has to not only look good and feel good, it also has to drive good. But on paper and having reviewed well overseas, the signs are good so far. Plenty of power, stacks of features, and a properly premium look. It's finally landed here in Australia, so we're going to see how it handles our local conditions. With a starting price of $132,900 before on roads, the Polestar 3 isn't exactly a budget offering, but with its design focus and its sustainability story, the brand says that pre-order books in Australia have been pretty healthy so far. The launch edition for the Polestar 3 is what we've driven here, and it comes with a fairly generous stack of options as standard, including the Pilot Pack and the Plus Pack. As mentioned, the long-range dual motor starts from $123,900. Or for an extra $9,000, you can get the Performance Pack at $141,900. The Performance Pack also adds brake calipers, valve caps, and seatbelts finished in Swedish gold as color highlights. From the 2025 model year, there will also be a long-range single-motor variant starting from a much lower $118,420 with Pilot Pack included at no extra cost. That Pilot Pack includes lane centering, lane change, and surround view cameras, though a LiDAR version with more capability will be available for $7,500. Model year 25 cars will remain similar in price as the launch edition cars, with the dual motor at $132,720 and the performance edition at $144,420, but options packs will cost extra. The Plus Pack will then be a $9,000 option, which includes the very impressive 25-speaker Bowers & Wilkins sound system, active road noise cancellation, a head-up display and an infrared windscreen, a heated steering wheel and heated rear seats, electric steering wheel adjustment, air quality control, and soft closed doors. A Napa leather interior upgrade can be had for $7,500, adding ventilation and massage functions to the front seats. Other options include a $1,700 wool interior, metallic paint for $2,000, a 1.3 megapixel LED headlight set for $3,000, an electric fold-away tow bar that can be had for $2,900 and can tow 2,200 kilos braked. So basically what I'm saying is if you're easily carried away when it comes to options boxes, check out the Polestar configurator. A few clicks for a highly optioned car and I was looking at more than $190,000 drive away. Without any options though, the configurator returned a $154,396 drive-away price for the Performance Pack version. So if value is your aim, get in while the launch editions are still around. When it comes to the way this car looks, there's heaps to talk about, and that was a very deliberate thing by the designers at Polestar. This being an electric car, they wanted to take advantage of not needing to be constricted by the proportions of an ICE car, but they also didn't want to make it look boring for the sake of aerodynamics. For a start, for a large SUV, its overall proportions don't look particularly like a large SUV. It's a little bit higher up on the ground and its roofline is a little bit lower, which I'll come back to later, but doesn't really affect the interior in terms of the space that you have for you that much. On the exterior though, it's got a quite muscular vibe, especially thanks to these haunches over the front wheels, which come thanks to that dipped bonnet in the middle. Obviously, there's no engine underneath. At the front, there's an aerofoil which has a gap between the bonnet and itself, and that works with the rear spoiler to create better aerodynamics. While Polestar's also moving away from Volvo in terms of its design story, it still has some Swedish touches like those Thor hammer headlights as well. Another couple of things to note on the side of the car here are that although the long-range dual motor has fairly standard sized 20-inch wheels, the 22s that come on the performance version are quite big. Also, these side mirrors are pretty cool looking and they do a pretty good job from inside the car, but even on the outside, they're quite nice little sculptural pieces. The Polestar 3's interior cabin feels as premium as you would want it to given the price point. For example, there are almost no hard, scratchy plastics in here, and even the stuff that looks like it might be has a little bit of a soft feel to it. For example, down in the bottle holders on the door cards. In fact, all the materials in here feel properly sturdy and premium. There are quite a few different ones, and some of them even have markings regarding their sustainability from the brand. But because of all the design elements in here, I probably wouldn't go as far to call it Scandinavian minimalism. In fact, there's a lot of intricate little details everywhere you look, and it's quite nice in here. Of course, one of the main things you'll notice in here is that all the controls for pretty much everything are taken over by this screen here, which can be a little bit frustrating when you're on the move, but I think Polestar's done a pretty good job to make it as simple and easy to use as possible. I'd still prefer physical buttons, but as far as big screens go, this one works relatively well, even if occasionally you need to give it an extra tap just to make sure the screen knows what you're doing. For example, in here, a lot of the drive modes are able to be controlled by the screen, so things like the suspension feeling, the steering feeling, how much regenerative braking you get, which I don't think is quite enough in this car, but I'll come to that when I'm on the road. Even things like how much it creeps when you take your foot off the brake. Another thing that's definitely worth mentioning in this car is how good its speaker system sounds and the options you have for customizing the way it sounds. The speakers in this car absolutely bang. We've been cranking the songs on the drive route today, and it sounds so good that even with the bass turned quite high up, it's also showing that there's not a lot of rattling in the car's interior materials, which is a good sign. In terms of the actual usability and ergonomics of the space in here, it doesn't look like there's plenty of storage space, but the bin in here is pretty decently deep. There's a couple of cup holders covered by a little slider here, and then you've got a storage space under this little panel here as well, with a wireless phone charger just on top there. The door bins are also big enough to hold a decently sized water bottle, plus a few other relatively bulky items. The seats themselves too are really comfortable. Once you get used to the way that you adjust them in this car, you'll find that you can probably get yourself into a pretty comfy position, and as just a seat to hold you in while you're driving on pretty fast, windy roads, they do a really good job as well. While it definitely feels like a large SUV from the front seats, it becomes immediately obvious how big the space in here is from the back seats. For a start, I have heaps of knee room, headroom, even foot room with my toes underneath the seat in front of me. And my shoulders got quite a bit of distance to the side of the car as well. The width of the car feels particularly noticeable in here because you can see down the side of the front seats towards the front of the car as well, something you'd normally feel a little bit more closed in with. When we got picked up from the airport for this launch here, we managed to fit 3 adult car journalists in the back seat here, and while I'd probably say that that's only good enough for a short trip, I reckon 2 people could quite comfortably handle a road trip in the back seat here with ease. In terms of amenity here in the back seat, you've got the usual armrest, although with a pop-out cup holder instead of the ones that sit here, and it's a nice leather material, it's quite comfortable. You've also got heated seats back here, your own vents and your own temperature control as well, plus a couple of USB-C ports as well down there, and a roughly decent size door card storage for a water bottle as well.
Behind the rear seats, there's 848 litres of space up to the seat backs, or 597 litres of boot space up to the roof. With the seats folded down, there's 1,411 litres, plus there's a 32 litre frunk at the front of the car. For now, the Polestar 3 comes along as an all-wheel drive dual-motor EV, which in its standard long-range variant outputs 360 kilowatts and 840 newton meters. Those are pretty impressive figures, but a performance pack adds an additional 20 kilowatts and 70 newton meters. This adds up to the Polestar 3 having 380 kilowatts and 910 newton meters in its most powerful form. The two versions can hit 100 km an hour in 5 seconds flat and 4.7 seconds respectively, though both top out at 210 km an hour. Later, a single motor variant that we mentioned earlier will arrive for the 2025 model year. It'll be rear-wheel drive and make 220 kilowatts, but will boast the longest range in the lineup.
From the driver's seat, the Polestar 3 doesn't really feel like one of those cars that shrinks around you and disguises its size, but it does disguise its weight relatively well in some of the corners we've been driving around here in Tasmania, despite the fact that it is more than 2.5 tons. And that's because it has proper torque converting at the rear wheels rather than just braking on the inside, which basically means it handles a lot better through tight turns than something of this size should. It still can't quite defy physics. There's a massive 111 kilowatt hour battery underneath here, and even though that keeps the center of gravity pretty low, especially on larger wheels, some of the sharp bumps and rough roads around Tasmania have shown up the car to be a little bit rough, but generally through some of the pretty wide sweeping corners around here, it's feeling like a pretty pleasant thing to drive cross country. It's also quite adjustable. Everything from the steering to the braking regeneration to the suspension is all able to be changed through the massive iPad-like screen in the middle of the car here. And even though in its firmer setting, you do get a little bit more what feels like better control out of the car through some of the corners, it is a little harsher, so you can change it to a softer setting for when you're just cruising along the highway. Same thing with the steering. It really loads up the weight when you're going around tight bends, and it's pretty useful for those, but it feels like it might be a little bit too much for just cruising along. And even in light, once you get used to it, even though it doesn't have heaps of feeling, it does start to feel quite easy to steer the car, and it becomes almost effortless. In terms of its power delivery between the non-performance version and the performance version, there's about 20 kilowatts difference, and in both of them you can set between range and a power focus. And the acceleration in range is relatively smooth. It doesn't quite give you that electric car immediate torque kick, but in performance, if you need to overtake on the highway, that's right there for you when you need it. One thing to note about the Polestar 3 is that Polestar says it has one pedal driving, but even though you don't really want it to slam on the brakes when you let off the accelerator at 100 k's an hour, I'm currently in the maximum regeneration mode, and I've just coasted for hundreds of meters, which if I was driving around in the city, I probably wouldn't actually be calling it one pedal driving. I'd definitely be using the brake to stop me before I hit the car in front of me. So even though that's what it's called, I don't think it's quite one pedal driving. And given how adjustable this car is, it seems like it's a bit of a missed opportunity to at least have a setting where if you want to do that, you can. I'm happy to say that the other thing I've found with this car is, despite the fact that there are plenty of active safety systems and things working away in the background to make sure that you are driving safely and paying attention, I haven't noticed any of it intervening or interrupting or even just being distracting during the drive. The Polestar 3 was rated pretty highly for its driving in our original overseas launch of this car in Spain. And even though some of Australia's, let's say, more unique roads have shown up a couple of tiny cracks in the armour of this car, for something that has to handle 2.5 tons with a massive battery underneath the floor of it, I think it does a pretty good job of what it's probably going to be doing most of the time. And that's not necessarily driving at 100 k's an hour around sharp country roads. It's more likely daily driving in urban and suburban areas, or maybe even being used as a bit of a cross-country tourer.
Under WLTP testing, the Polestar 3 has a claimed range of up to 628 kilometers, though the performance pack reduces that to 561. Drawing from a huge 111 kilowatt hour battery, the 3 should use between 19.8 and 21.8 kilowatt hours for every 100 kilometers driven, or for the performance pack, 22.1 to 23 kilowatt hours per 100 Ks. On test, the trip computer was returning much higher figures in both variants, averaging around 25.9 kilowatt hours for the standard and 27 kilowatt hours for the performance version. It's worth noting that a slower section of the drive loop returned a 22.4 kilowatt hour reading in the standard version though. There's no ANCAP rating for the Polestar 3 yet, but given the brand's association with Volvo and even Polestar's own philosophy, it would be surprising if it fell short of top marks. 5 radars, 5 cameras, 12 ultrasonic sensors, and plenty of software is in place to do the job of subtly keeping the car on the road safely, with Polestar Australia opting to make the Pilot Pack standard, adding more safety kit for no cost. There are infrared cameras that track the driver's eyes, motion sensing radars to monitor the interior, pretty much every active safety function you could think of, and 9 airbags inside should the worst occur. Polestar has a free service plan for the first 5 years of ownership, or 100,000 Ks, whichever comes first. There's also a 5-year vehicle warranty and an 8-year or 160,000 K warranty for the battery performance and material. If the battery's health drops below 70% of its original capacity within the first 8 years of ownership, the battery gets replaced at no cost to the customer. Now that the 3 has landed here in Australia, it's pretty clear that Polestar is onto something quite good. It's a really good looking thing, and inside it feels properly nice. On the roads, even though it's clear that it can't escape its 2.5 ton curb weight, it's clear that there's some performance potential in the engineering behind this brand. And it's a really pleasant thing to drive cross country on those smooth, long, windy roads. When it comes down to it, Polestar 3 customers are going to be most influenced by its design and its sustainability, but they're also going to find themselves with a pretty comfortable premium day-to-day car that has a little bit of a performance edge. If this is what the brand has coming, with more models on the way, I think it's a good sign for the future.